Hello. Now tomorrow 0.6.4 will be hitting, and it's actually probably one of the best patches for World of Warships in I don't know how long. It's one of those few patches where I pretty much agree with everything they've done and fully support, and I'm actually really happy to see this patch. Now, let's start off with the simple things. The Henri IV, of course, it had huge issues that I highlighted, and of course, Wargaming agreed with pretty much everything. They decided to buff the reload on the guns from the 17.3 seconds to 12.3. Now, this is a pretty boring fix. If you remember, I preferred that they would increase the alpha on the guns instead, so that it would be this hard-hitting cruiser. But they wanted to go with the safe and pretty boring fix of just giving it a lot of reload. But it's still a buff, which is what it pretty much needed a lot, because the DPM on it was so awful. So the reload is getting changed to 12.3, which of course means with reload mod you're gonna get it to 10 point something. So that's a very much needed buff. The speed boost is also being changed from the current 15%. Tiers 8 to 10 will get 20% speed boost. So this ship is actually going to be really fast. They're also increasing the duration to 180 seconds, which means 3 minutes, which makes me highly consider slotting a speed boost mod on this ship like I run on my other speedy DDs. So once again, use this current Clash of the Elements thing to farm yourself some speed boost modules if you haven't already. I highly recommend it. So this ship is going to be quite fast, it's going to have a lot of DPM, but of course it still had one weakness, which was the lack of armor, especially on the middle deck here. You saw the huge volleys I used to eat. Well, Wargaming, they realized this issue as well, so in the patch they're actually buffing this armor to 30 millimeters. Now this is huge, of course, because every single AP shell in the game will bounce, except for Yamato. So this armor gets, before this 25mm gets overmatched by pretty much everything. All of these ships that you're facing, North Carolina, Iowa, Montana, Grosse Kurfürst, Friedrich the Grosse, everyone you were facing, Izumos and so forth, all of them could overmatch this. But when it gets buffed to 30mm, they can no longer overmatch it, which is a huge change and will increase your tankiness in the ship massively. Now you still have the squishy, of course, 25mm forend deck and forend plating. And your stern is of course still as squishy, but long-range plunging fire will no longer be as crazily important. So that's a huge change and a buff that this ship very much needed. So once again, hey, I fully agree with Wargaming. And so with these changes, the ship will absolutely, without a doubt, be competitive. We'll see how it plays, but looking at the reload and the fire chance that this ship has and how good it is at starting fires, I'm pretty sure it's gonna play very similarly to the Zao. Now that's not really that unique, but hey, at least it will be a competitive ship. It won't be garbage anymore. So ultimately all these changes were good things, so I'm pretty happy about that. The Henri IV will be a viable option once the patch hits. Second change, of course, is the Grozovoi. Where is my Grozovoi? Here's my Grozovoi. They are changing the stealth from 8.82 to 8.29. That's a pretty massive buff, in fact. That's like 500 meters of concealment. Now, why is this important? Well, if you run the gunboat build that I recommend, you're going to be enjoying, instead of 7.7, you're going to be enjoying 7.2 km. So this will be significantly less vulnerable than the Khabarovsk. And not quite stealthy enough to be able to get close to the other DDs, but it will allow it more freedom, and I quite like this buff. I thought the ship was already pretty strong, but this concealment buff is pretty welcome since it still doesn't really hold a candle to the Khabarovsk. And of course, if you go full stealth build, you can reach 6.5 concealment with the new buff instead of 6.9. So once again, you can't really take on the other gunboats or stealth boats, but you get a lot more freedom. I'm still gonna keep my old build though, because it's proven to be so very strong. And another great change, talking about reducing concealment, is the New Orleans. They are changing the concealment on the New Orleans from 12.42 base, 12.4, to 11.82. Now, why is this such a big deal? Why is this change such a big deal? Because if you go full stealth build with concealment module and concealment module and concealment expert and camo and all of this, you can actually reach a pretty impressive full stealth of 9.1 kilometers. Now, for those that aren't aware, of course, the radar on the ship, I'm pretty sure it was 9 kilometers exactly on the New Orleans. So why is this a big deal? Yeah, I think this one has slightly better at 9.45, but the New Orleans has a 9 kilometer radar. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, if your concealment is 9.1 and your radar is 9, it means that whenever you get spotted in the New Orleans in the patch, you can pretty much automatically radar and you will be able to spot whoever is spotting you. So the New Orleans goes from this not that interesting ship into a very strong anti-DD counter, and in general a very sneaky stealthy ship that will and because of course the USAP, I mean, even though it's fairly good against DDs now with this change, it still doesn't have the firepower itself to really melt DDs because of the New Orleans reload isn't that impressive. However, USAP is fantastic, so the New Orleans will become a real threat towards Royal Navy cruisers and really any smoke cruisers because, well, with 9.1 concealment you can really sneak and ambush a lot of other ships, which is very interesting. And of course the New Orleans has been falling off in tier 8, so this buff is great and overall something I approve of a lot, since it's going to be a real threat, and it might even, well, it's probably going to be seen in ranked if the ranked is tier 8, and it might even be seen in competitive. That still remains to be seen, but it's possible since it is a pretty big deal, the change in concealment. Now, there's also multiple turret buffs to IGN DDs. I don't really rate these too highly. I mean, a lot of these guns are going to get small turret traverse buffs. That's great, but not that big of a deal. It's helpful. I mean, the fact that they recognize that these ships need the help is always good. But the most important turret traverse buff is the Mogami, especially the 155mm guns. This is another tier 8 ship that has been struggling, the 155mm version of this, which used to be one of my favorite ships to play. Now they are actually buffing this turret traverse from the usual 51.4 seconds. They are buffing the turret traverse to 36 seconds. So of course when you run expert marksman and things like that, I won't even need to run main battery mod anymore thanks to this. I'll actually be able to switch to AA or maybe aiming systems, we'll see. So with this buff, of course, the turret traverse is going to be much better, and this ship is going to be so much more comfortable to play since you can more actively maneuver and dodge, and your turrets will be able to keep up with the targets, unlike now when you have battleship, even worse than battleship turret traverse. So another great buff that I fully agree with. They are also buffing all German cruisers tier 8s and higher. What they are doing is that they are changing the bow armor from 25mm, this one, they're changing it to 27. Now, what's so special about this change? Well, it means that 155mm HE can no longer penetrate it, unless they run IFHE. If they run IFHE, which most of these will do, it really won't have any impact at all, so not really that big of a deal. The other big change is, once again, the Euromatch mechanic. Once this is changed to 27mm, 380 and 381mm guns can no longer overmatch your nose. So that means you can point full nose in like this towards Bismarck, Tirpitz, Bayern, Gneisenau, all of these, and they can no longer overmatch your nose. You'll be able to tank the shells. So for the Prince Eugen and Hipper, this is a pretty okay buff, but for ships like the Hindenburg, who will honestly really only face 2 of these ships, which is the Bismarck and Tirpitz, which aren't exactly ships this ship struggled with to begin with, it won't have much of an impact at all. In fact, it will change very little, but it's a pretty insignificant buff, yes, but once again, Wargaming recognizing that these ships need some help is a good change, and the fact that they're willing to do something about it is a good change. They might notice this didn't have the impact they wished, so they will move on to give it some additional help. Once again, I approve. This is good, even though it's not everything I wished for. Another great change is the Des Moines. They are buffing the middle deck armor. Now the same issue the Henri IV had, of course, with being overmatched from plunging fire. They are changing this armor from 27mm to 30mm. Once again, it will give it slightly better HE protection, unless they use IFHE, in which case it won't matter at all. But the big deal here, of course, is 30mm, as I said, won't get overmatched by anything besides Yamato shells. So this means the Moines will be significantly tankier from long-range shells. That doesn't mean, of course, that they still can't overmatch your nose. That doesn't mean that you're still not as squishy as before if you give broadside. But at least those plunging fire ridiculous 25k volleys from US battleships aren't going to be happening anymore. So that's a great change. I approve. Very, very glad about this. Another great change, which I made a whole vid about how you count torpedo reaction times, but it's worth pointing out that it's hitting in this patch. They are changing the torpedo detection. F3s are changed from 1.9 to 1.8, but the more important ones, the ones I use, Type 93 Mod 3, are changed from 1.9 to 1.7, which is a nice buff in reduced reaction time. Instead of having this, where do you have it? Here, oops. Torpedoes, yeah, here we go. Instead of having torpedo detectability 1.9, it will be 1.7. Now, if you watch my torpedo vid, you will know exactly what this means in terms of reaction time. But let's just say that this is something I greatly approve of. They understand one of the issues with the Shima, which is the inconsistency, and this will of course help in dealing more consistent damage. Will this make the Shima equal with all the other DDs? Unlikely, but once again, this is a step in the right direction, a buff to a ship that needs it. I approve. Another interesting change, something that I didn't really consider, but is once again quite welcome, is the change to the Tirpitz. They are changing the secondaries, which are quite anemic. They are 4.5 km by default. They are being changed to 7. Now this is in fact the same range the Bismarck has. So if you go full secondary build, of course like I run on my Bismarck, you can reach 10.6 km range, and you will be able to do the same thing on the Tirpitz. Now this is quite nice because, well, to be fair, it was kind of ridiculous that a lot of lower tier ships like the Scharnhorst, Gneisenau and these actually had better secondaries than the Tirpitz. That didn't make much sense. But also the Tirpitz was released before a lot of buffs came out to all the other ships. When Tirpitz was released, it was quite a competitive ship. It was seen in competitive play. But then the buffs started coming in for all the other tier 8 battleships. We had Amage get the armor fixed, which made it a fantastic brawler. We had North Carolina have the accuracy buffed significantly, both short and long range. So it became the sniper. And then the Bismarck came out, which increased the gap between or the options once again, because it had the fantastic hydro and the secondaries. So the Tirpitz hasn't really been seen in competitive play at all in a while, and Wargaming clearly recognized this as well. Well, I doubt they watch too much competitive, but they recognized that the Tirpitz has been kind of lagging behind. So this change, this buff to the secondaries is quite welcome, because now instead of choosing between torpedo tubes that get broken quite often and are quite short range, and amazing secondaries and hydro, instead now you choose between torps and hydro. That's the difference between Bismarck. One has the great self-defense in form of hydro, the other has the great YOLO capability in terms of torpedoes. So that's the big difference between the two battleships now, and I approve. I think this is good, because I haven't played my Tirpitz in ages, because the Bismarck is just such a better ship. And with this change, I will no doubt be testing out my Tirpitz, because it seems like a brawler's dream now. Turtleback, torps, and secondaries. Like, holy shit, I just want to go in and fight with this new one. It sounds like a lot of fun. So, once again, a change I greatly approve of. In terms of nerfs, though, they are finally touching the Khabarovsk. Thank God for that. This ship really needed a nerf, because this ship is absolutely ridiculous right now. A lot of people explain how it's their favorite ship, and no shit, it's probably your favorite ship, considering this ship kind of shits on everything else in the game right now. Ever since they buffed the HE from 1.6 to 1.9, this ship became absolutely ridiculous, and a nerf was very much needed. So the fact that they're touching the rudder shift, they're changing it, I think it was from 4.9 to, or whatever the default was, 6.4 I think, because I'm running the rudder shift module. 6 point something, they're changing it to 11.4. So this is a pretty big deal. Like, it's honestly, it's not that big of a nerf, because you can, I'm probably going to counter it by myself by just putting on the steering gears mod, and this will pretty much undo the whole nerf that has been hit. But it will cost me some concealment, which will of course make the Khabarovsk struggle getting in close, and that's of course the whole goal of the patch, was to make it less of a close range DD, because right now it's fucking amazing at everything. So I still think once the patch hits and I hit this ship with the steering gears mod 3, I still think this ship is going to be overpowered. Like, I'm pretty sure the Khabarovsk is still going to be too strong even after the nerf, but at least Wargaming has recognized this. The fact that they're willing to nerf it has recognized it, that it's too strong, and they are willing to do something about it. So that's once again a step in the right direction, like most of this patch has been. So I'm quite happy about that. There are a bunch of other smaller changes, smaller bug fixes, but I don't really care about them too much. These are the things I care about. Oh, and finally, a new port is coming out in the next patch, the dry dock port. If you haven't seen it, you're in for a treat. I recommend don't spoil it for yourself. It's the coolest looking port in this game so far. It's, as the name says, it is a dry dock, which is really, really cool. It's well done, well animated, and I really enjoy it. But ultimately, 0.6.4 is looking to be one of the best patches in this game so far. A lot of great changes, a lot of great balancing changes, and honestly I'm looking forward to this patch. All the changes are pretty much great. So honestly I hope Wargaming keeps this up, because in this patch there's no doubt that they've been listening to the community, or well, their stats has been reflecting the same things the community has been saying. So yeah, well done Wargaming, I hope you keep this up.